The anime started with Usato. He is a pathetic loser high schooler with nothing going on in his life. Bad grades, no friends, no girls, just like you. In short, he's the nice guy who helps some birds on a usual day. Yet, he wishes he was in a fantasy world to cure his boredom of being an ordinary loser, but one day someone steals his umbrella and he decides to wait for the rain to pass because princesses cannot get wet. However, despite the waiting, the rain never stops. Suddenly, he hears the student council president Susan and asking him what's going on. She asks if he doesn't have an umbrella, and despite being nervous around her, he confirms. She tells him the school is about to close, and Usato takes it as a clue to get his ugly face out of her sight. He decides to leave, but the beautiful and perfect president stops him by telling him she won't let him get wet. Suddenly, Vice President Kazuki appears, the typical perfect dude, and claims that he will let Usato have his spare. Susan asks if they're friends, but Kazuki replies they're classmates. Usato is confused because they never spoke before, but realizes that he's the typical disgusting nice guy. Usato thanks him for the umbrella, and Kazuki asks what they should call him. Susan steps in the middle of them, telling him she will also call him Usato. Our pathetic loser blushes, thinking she's trying to flirt with him. They ask if he wants to walk home with them, to which he also cannot believe he gets the chance to walk with the cool kids. He accepts the deal, and as they walk, Usato explains that Kazuki only talks to girls and stuff. Kazuki's answer is that he simply answers the girls' questions. Susan teases Kazuki's popularity, and Usato tries to give his best shot. He mentions how Susan is pretty much a goddess. Yes, he barely leaves his mom's basement. Susan calls herself an average student, but Kazuki also decides to join the Dumb and Dumber party, mentioning how perfect she is. She's the best student, great at sports, kind, and also pretty. Usato then decides to give his shot and asks if they're a couple. The two get confused but explain those are just rumors because they spend tons of time together in the student council. She still feels impressed that Usato is the only person who had a pair to ask it. Susan asks if Usato has some plans for the future, but he plans to stay in his mom's basement. Kazuki mentions that she asks the same question to everyone. Susan replies that she's just curious because she has none. Usato asks why she doesn't, and she reveals that she doesn't have any because she accomplishes all her goals pretty fast. She reveals that for that reason, she feels isolated and doesn't think she belongs to this place, but Usato thinks that they're quite similar as they feel the same thing about their lives. Suddenly, Susan and Kazuki heard a bell and stopped. Usato is confused and asks what's going on. Kazuki asks if he heard the bell, but Usato doesn't. They hear the bell again, this time even louder, but Usato still cannot hear it. He gets closer when suddenly a magic circle appears under their feet. Kazuki starts to freak out, but Usato spits some facts. They're being summoned to another world. Kazuki thinks that this loser is crazy, but Susan's reaction shocks them. She's smiling while asking if he means that they will reach a place full of magic monsters and heroes. In those last moments, Usato is impressed about how Susan has a thing for that stuff. Seconds later, they open their eyes to find themselves inside a strange room. Upon looking around, they see a random geezer sitting on a throne. Usato is confused about this place and its people, but Kazuki doesn't know. He then looks for Susan just to find her hyped and smiling because this is another world. He thinks she just went bonkers. The old geezer sitting on the throne is happy they managed to wake up and stuff, but Kazuki arrogantly asks, "What is this all about?" The geezer introduces himself as Lloyd, the king of Linger. Kazuki is confused, but Susan is happy about it. The king explains they have been summoned as heroes, which makes Susan even happier. The king explains the same garbage as always as a demon lord who resurrected and is currently raising its armies. The kingdom has been attacked for the past 2 years, but they barely survived. Their last hope was to the forbidden spell to summon heroes from another world to fight against the guy who was cheated on by his wife. Susan is always acting ecstatic every time she hears something new. However, Kazuki gets mad and tells him to stop kidding. He literally calls the king selfish for dragging them here and doing the dirty work. He asks them to return them to their world, but the king explains that's not possible because the summoning only works in one direction. Kazuki continues his Karen mode, mentioning they all have families and stuff. The king replies they are desperate, but Kazuki couldn't care less. He gets angrier, but the soldiers point their arms at him. Usato tries to calm him down, and Kazuki finally follows some good advice. The king walks forward and kneels in front of Kazuki, promising to find a way to send them home after the job is done. Everyone else also kneels, and Susan asks the king why he is calling them heroes. The king tells his mage Welsi to explain. She reveals that the summoning spell seeks people who have the potential to become heroes. In short, everyone with that potential will hear the sound of a bell ringing. Susan and Kazuki understand that condition but then remember that Usato is different. They ask if he truly didn't hear anything and he confirms, which means he got here by accident. His parents didn't want him nor this world, just like you. They then go into Wellesley's room to check their magical aptitude. All they need to do is touch the crystal ball and they will find which magic they can use. Susan becomes all hyped out while Wellesley starts preparing for the test. Meanwhile, Kazuki asks Usato if he's alright with all of this. Usato says it's fine as Wellesley already told him he could probably still use magic despite not being able to be a hero. However, Kazuki is talking about being summoned to this world against his will. In his case, they didn't even want him. Usato dismisses it because it's all he wanted. Kazuki thinks that Usato is pretty chill about it, but he mentions that Susan is the odd one. They look at her being a typical weirdo and think that's true to the point that Kazuki thinks this is her being an optimist. Usato knows this is not the case, but they suddenly see the crystal ball glowing. Wellesley made all preparations and told Susan to start her test. She happily touches the crystal ball and a yellow glow appears. Wellesley explains that this means that she can use thunder magic, but she also has a huge amount of mana. Kazuki thinks that Susie looks happy, but deep down Usato knows this magic fits her fantasy dream. Kazuki then touches the crystal ball and it turns white. Wellesley explains he has a light attribute. Susan becomes all hyped up telling him to use a laser beam and stuff, but Usato tells her to stop being a nerd. She gets annoyed that Usato cut her off, but she then reveals that she likes that in a man. Usato feels shattered. He thought of her as the perfect girl. Turns out she's a freak. Wellesley explains that light magic is the strongest attribute because it counters the Demon Lord. Usato decides to try it too, but there's a flash of green. Susan and Kazuki think that's a beautiful and calming color and ask Wellesley what is that attribute. Yet, Wellesley is freaking out. She grabs Usato's hand and runs back into the throne room. The king is confused but asks if they already checked their aptitudes. Wellesley confirms mentioning Kazuki and Susan's huge potential, but there is a problem: Usato. The king laughs while asking if he has the power to control darkness or something, but he's shocked when he learns the crystal turned green. Wellesley explains his attribute is extremely rare, but the king tells her to shut up and not say it. Usato is confused, thinking his attribute is bad. The king starts to plot, mentioning they must take Usato as far away from the castle as possible. However, he doesn't think there's any safe place. Maybe they should hide him in town for a while. Meanwhile, a woman is walking in the hallway. The king tells his guards to make preparations, but Usato says that he doesn't understand what's going on. He asks if he's dangerous and if there is someone else with his attribute. The king freaks out as he replies yes, but that person is bad news. Suddenly, the woman walks into the throne room scaring everyone. This is the person the king was talking about. She asks the king how the summoning ritual went and if the heroes are already there. The king tries to play it cool, asking if it isn't her off day. Yet, she refuses to take any off days. She then notices Usato and asks if he's the hero. Usato gets scared and crawls back, and the king explains he was summoned by mistake along with the heroes. He calls Usato an average pleb, but she clearly notices the king is sweating. She asks for his name and introduces herself as Rose, the captain of the rescue team. Yet, Usato clearly knows that she looks like someone who should be killing, not rescuing someone. While she intervenes, mentioning the heroes are waiting by the crystal ball and tells her she will take Rose there, Rose accepts that and prepares to leave. The king feels relieved everything went well and tells Usato to rest while they figure out what to do in his situation. Usato accepts, but he wants to know what his magic attribute means. He stupidly asks what a green light means. Upon hearing those words, Rose stops. Everyone inside the room starts to freak out. Rose turns back and asks if he just said green. Usato confirms and she tells the king that she will be taking Usato with her. The king freaks out, telling Wellesley to get Usato out of there. Wellesley casts a spell creating a bubble around Usato, forcing him out of the castle. Yet, Rose smiles and dashes outside with her insane speed. Wellesley's bubble gets out of the window and tries to take him as far as possible outside the kingdom. However, Rose's speed and power enable her to catch up with him. She then punches the bubble, breaking it. Usato thinks he's done for. After all, there are no parachutes in this world, yet Rose manages to reach and catch him. She uses a statue to break down her fall and calls out the king. She tells him that she will turn Usato into a proper healer and walks away. The king shouts at her to return, mentioning that he knows that she wants to recruit more healers. However, Usato was summoned by accident. Rose ignores the king and continues walking. After returning inside, Wellesley explains to Susan and Kazuki that Usato was taken. They're worried he might be in danger, but Wellesley explains that's not the case. Kazuki wants an explanation. She reveals he was taken away from the castle to the rescue squad. She reveals that Usato's attribute is healing magic. Healers are rare in this world and Rose is one of them. Meanwhile, Rose is taking Usato under her arm to her base when a fox girl pays attention to what's happening. Wellesley continues to explain that Rose will basically teach Usato everything she knows. Susan thinks that's pretty normal, but Wellesley reveals that Rose's training methods are unorthodox, which means Usato will be living in hell. After reaching the base, Rose explains Usato has the potential to become a healer. He's pretty confused, and she reveals he will be living here from now on, and that's the reason she brought him. She then calls the rest of the members, but when Usato looks at them, he realizes they're literally a band of bandits. Rose tells them to take care of Usato, but they all look at him like serial killers. He tries to back away while scared in fear, but the guys introduce themselves, which looks more like a robbery. Yet, Rose kicks Ton away because Usato is crying in fear. They complain, mentioning they were introducing themselves in a nice way. Rose then explains they all belong to the squad but are not healers. In fact, her rescue squad has only 2 more healers, but they're stationed somewhere else, which is why she will personally teach him about healing magic. Usato freaks out. His instincts are telling him to scream and run, but he can't move. He tries to ask for another instructor, but she ignores him while saying the training starts tomorrow. She orders Tong to show Usato the place and leaves. The bandit gang smiles at him and tells him how miserable his life will become because Rose will be teaching him. In short, he will be living in hell. During the night, Usato is initially worried about everything, but he then realizes there is no point in worrying and falls asleep. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.